Trait blocks are always popular with quilters, and since we have a lot of quilters on our mailing list from Norway, I decided today that I would demonstrate how to sew a Norway pine quilt block. This is Penny Hallgren from howtoquilt.com and quiltblocklibrary.com. Here's the block, and it's going to present some interesting challenges. The upper part here is pretty straightforward, it's just triangles, but down here there's a strip, and then this lower corner has some interesting pieces that I'm going to sew together in a way that makes it easier and more accurate. So I'm ready to get started. I've got my pieces cut out. Let's go to the sewing machine. My pieces are all cut out, but I just have a few laid out here because I have these stacks of half square triangles. And so the first step is just to sew all of my half square triangles together. I'll open them up and then I'll lay them out on the flannel table the way I want them sewn together. Now I have everything laid out, and what I'm going to do is sew these half square triangles together, and it's going to be pretty easy because I'm just going to flip them over and sew them in pairs, just like that. Now I've got these sewn together in pairs. I'm going to sew these together, and then I'm going to start sewing these. Now I've got these four sewn together, so I just need to add these two pieces, and then I'll be ready to sew those two rows together. Now I have my top two rows sewn together and my side two rows sewn together. And so what I did was I moved everything away from this little big triangle here in the bottom, because this is where I'm going to focus my attention next. What I want to do is get this whole square put together, and then I'll be ready to sew the block together. So the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to sew these three pieces together. You'll notice that I cut these in squares and have a triangle, and then I'm going to add this triangle to that square so that it makes that shape. And then I have my half square triangle sewn in the corner here. So the first thing I'm going to do is sew these little triangles onto that little baseball home plate shape. And in order to keep my chain stitching going, I'm going to sew these triangles onto the corners of these squares. Now I've got all these little pieces sewn together, and the first thing I'm going to do is sew these two together. And the reason this isn't going to match up is because I cut this out as a square, and this little tip is going to get cut off when I sew it onto my strip in the center. So I'm going to sew these two together, and then I'm also going to sew these two together. Now I've got this sewn together, and so I'm going to sew these two units together, and then I'll be ready to cut the tips off here before I sew these two little triangles on. Now I've got these two pairs sewn together, so I just need to fold this down and sew the seam across there. Now I have this little unit sewn together, and you can see I've got these little triangle pieces sticking out. So I'm going to take it over to my ironing board, press it, and then take a ruler and just trim them off. And then we'll be ready to add these side triangles and sew the rest of the block together. Now with these tips trimmed off, I can add this triangle and that triangle. Now I've moved everything back down so I can kind of see what I'm doing. The first thing I'm going to do is sew this long strip onto this triangle section. And the key here is just to match up the ends and then smooth out the center. Now I've got that strip on, and all I need to do is sew this big triangle onto this other big triangle, and then we'll be ready to sew the final pieces of the block together. Now I think it's pretty obvious what needs to be done. So I've got this big square. I'm going to add this piece onto the side, and then I'll be able to add the top section. There we go. We got the bottom part done, and now just folding over the top part and sewing that, and this block will be finished. This Norway pine block is all finished and ready to be added to a quilt. It has a lot of pieces, and this bottom little corner is kind of complicated, but if you take it one step at a time, it's pretty easy. You can put this block square like that, or you can put it on point, which is kind of cool. Just add triangles, and that'll make it a square all the way around going the other way. Thanks for joining me. This is Penny Hallgren from quiltblocklibrary.com and also quiltblocklibrary.tv. If you're not already at quiltblocklibrary.com, you can head on over and get your free download of this pattern. Until next time, peaceful piecing.